I have a BA in comparative literature from UC Davis with a minor in Spanish. Originally, I went to Davis as an engineering student, so I took engineering level calculus classes. Would my degree count for credit? Now, it could. However, we would need you to send that in with your application, and we would make a determination based on the classification that you're applying for and looking at the official transcript from your school. In the presentation that you just saw, you got to see a small outline of the credit that you possibly could get from different degrees. So you have a general idea of what could happen. However, again, we would need to see the application with the original transcripts. And as a reminder, we do need the official original transcripts. So the next from the same person, David McLean, I have worked in trades for many years. I have helped on many building projects, but I was only an employee of a contractor for 1 year. All the other 20 years of experience I have were working on a time and materials basis, and the owner was pulling permits. I am a musician, so I wasn't able to take on full-time work under a contractor. How can I adequately prove my work experience apart from the 1 year as an employee? Um, so if you were working, let's see, you were working on a time and material basis and the owner was pulling the permit. So you were working for someone, an owner builder or an owner of a home. Um, Anybody can certify you. They have to have the firsthand knowledge of your experience. Um, It doesn't have to be an employer who does it. If you look at the options on the certification of work experience, there's several different options. It can be a business associate. It could be a contractor. It can be a fellow employee. You know, there's different options that you have. Um, so as far as a certification, anybody can do that. The owner can state what you did for them. If it was going for the B classification, which I see your next comment is going for a general B classification, potentially a B2. The B would require project lists and finalized permits and inspection reports. So if that owner who pulled those permits had that information, then we would want to see that. And it would show that this person pulled it, but you can say that you worked for him and that person would also be your certifier. Now, I'm not saying that would automatically get you that classification. However, that's what we would require. And then you would want to do at least that 1 year as the employee. We can't go back 20 years. It does have to be within 10 years of the receipt of your application. When we receive it is as far back as we can go with your experience. But if you also turn in your official transcripts, that can be taken into consideration. For a B2, because you mentioned going for a general B classification, potentially a B2. A B2, you have to have 3 unrelated trades. There is going to be no framing, as would be your main component of the B classification. So as the B2, you would have 3 unrelated trades. It could be, as an example, painting, drywall, maybe plumbing fixtures. Um, and that doesn't necessarily have to, you wouldn't show permits for that or inspection reports, but it would have to still be certified a minimum of 4 years within the last 10 years on a work cert. Next question. Would my current sole ownership DBA of NorCal Realty be an acceptable DBA, or will I need to create a new DBA? Well, I don't have all the information. So what classification do you hold? Um, you can't have more than one business name on a sole ownership. So you could either, if you have your personal name with the DBA NorCal Realty, that would be acceptable. If you didn't, then you couldn't have like Joe's Construction DBA NorCal Realty. As a sole owner, you cannot have more than one business name. And unfortunately, those two coincide and they are two business names. When it has your personal name, that's not considered a business name. But I would need more information on that. So if you wanted to provide more information, you could send an email to licensing. It's licensing at cslb.ca.gov. And then one of us would be able to give you a more in detail answer to your question. Beyond school, can I receive all my remaining 4 years of credit from working for an architect? So an architect is not a licensee. And dependent upon the classification that you're applying for, you might need to have, again, as before when we talked about the B classification, you might need to have project list with finalized permits and inspection reports. If you don't have those, and that does pertain to a couple different classes. So it's dependent upon your class, and it's dependent upon what the circumstances for. That's kind of a vague vague question because the architect is not licensed through CSLB. So it's not going to be something that we're going to have, information. We can't pull him up and say, okay, he's a B class. So we would need a little bit more information, and it might be a little bit more in detail of what you might need to show. Again, does the architect I work for need to fill out a different form than the certification of work experience, or is that the correct form? That is always the correct form for any applicant who is showing us their work experience. There is no other form. I wanted to verify online. It says I can receive credit from working for a former licensed contractor. To clarify, he had a contractor's license that expired before I worked for him. He now works as a designer and I work for him as a drafter. Okay, so if the license is expired, we do look at that and we would not grant credit. How would he be able to, how would you be able to work for him in the classification that you're applying for when he doesn't have a valid license? So that's something that we would look at. If you're just drawing plans, if that's what it means to be a drafter, and he now just works as a designer, again, that's not something that we license. We would have to see that there was hands-on experience or supervision of other employees. But again, it would have to be for a valid license. So that's a little, if you wanted to provide more information, you could also send an email to the licensing email, which is licensing at cslb.ca.gov. Who do I contact regarding booking accommodations for learning disabilities? I have ADHD that I have legal documentation for and would like accommodations for the exam. So when you send in your application, you are more than welcome to send in a reasonable accommodation documentation with that, and they will set that up for you so that if you need additional time or whatever the special circumstances, they would be able to work with you on that. Is there volume? I can't hear anything at all. Participants have their microphones off. So my microphone is on. I haven't been told anything differently. You might want to check yours and make sure that we're not muted, Juanita. But if you have a question and you still can't hear for some reason, you can send an email to the licensing@cslb.ca.gov. Renee, I'm still a bit confused. So I need a combination of 4 years experience or have someone that has that experience sign for me. Also, I thought I saw something saying I could be exempt if I take a test in place of experience. So no, you have to have the experience before we'll allow you to sit for the testing. Um, so every applicant sends in their application. They have the certification of work experience. Each applicant has to show 4 years minimum of journey level experience doing the trade that they've applied for. Once we are satisfied with what we've seen, and that could be making an additional phone call to your certifier, then we will schedule you to go on to testing. Um, but you can't just take a test. We have to see your experience before we allow you to take that test. I have experience as a business consultant for 7-Eleven Corporation. Does that qualify experience? Consultation, no. We want hands-on experience or supervision of employees of a licensed contractor that you supervise doing the trade. Again, journey level at a minimum for every applicant. Did a business training program through them, which I received a business management certificate. Unfortunately, we don't look at certificates, let's say through training programs like this. What we are allowed to give education credit for would be your official transcripts from a university, um, an apprenticeship from a union. But as far as certificates go, we would not be able to grant experience for that. What type of projects can a B2 contractor perform? So they cannot do any kind of framing. They cannot install HVAC, electrical, or plumbing. They can do. Um, if you look at the slide that's showing up here, um, you can you can make repairs um, or do like fixtures or whatnot on the electrical, the plumbing, and the HVAC. But you can't do installs or replacements. Again, no framing. And with the B classification, we want to see that you have framing, rough framing, structural framing. You can't do any of those with the B2. Cindy just said salesperson, and I'm not certain what you mean. If you want to apply for a home improvement salesperson, we do have an application on our website. What that allows you to do is to go into someone's home once you are registered and affiliated with a licensed contractor and sign contracts with them or change contracts with them. But you do have to be licensed, excuse me, not licensed, registered through the board and then associated with a contractor first. Can we have two businesses in one license? I don't quite know what you're saying, Clara. Um, if you want to go ahead and send us an email at the licensing@cslb.ca.gov with a little bit more information, we can try to get you a better answer. Cindy, does a salesperson have to be licensed with CSLB? If so, is there a fee? So they have to be registered with CSLB, and then once registered, they have to be affiliated with a licensed contractor. There is a fee for that application. I believe it is 200. Give me just a second. Of course, I don't have it on my desktop. There is a fee. It is included on the application. When you pull up the application on our website, it'll state at the top of what it is, and it does have to be renewed every 2 years. But again, you have to be registered with CSLB first, and then your registration needs to be affiliated with a licensed contractor before you can legally be a salesperson and go out and change or make new orders for a contractor. Who can get an exam waiver? So it's a little bit of a loaded question. If you've already tested in the classification that you're applying for, and it's been within 5 years, you can get an examination waiver as long as you're applying for the same classification. If you have been listed on a license as an officer, member, manager, general partner, it's a possibility that you can have a listed on license exam waiver. Same classification listed on the license is what you'd have to be applying for. There are certain circumstances and criteria that have to be met. So that's why I say could. It's not always a guarantee. So those are a few of the waivers that you could possibly apply for. Tariq, if I am applying for a B license and I worked for a person prior to him becoming a general contractor B licensed, do those years count? What evidence can I provide to prove that? So it sounds like you're saying that you worked for him before he was licensed. So, and that's my assumption. For B, we do look to see if you had a licensed employer. We do look to see if they were current. If in doubt, we will ask for project list. We could ask for finalized permits and inspection reports. So those are some of the things that we would ask for if we see that somebody is not licensed. Let's say you worked for somebody in Nevada and they had a B similar license. We could go look at Nevada's state board and pull that up and see that they were licensed, they were um, current and good standing, and contracted in the times that you stated that you were employed by them, and in that case, we wouldn't ask you for additional information. But as far as your employer not being a general B or not licensed prior when you worked for him, you would probably have additional information asked of you, and um, it would be on you to provide that once we did ask for that. If you couldn't, then we probably would not be able to grant that classification or suggest that you apply for something that you would be able to meet the criteria for. I have been working for a contractor for the past 6 years as a plumber. Is it best to apply for a Class B or a Class C license? So if you worked for a plumber, chances are you're not going to have the experience for a B. And if you worked for 6 years for that plumber, I mean, I would, the course of action that I would take, I would be applying for my C36 plumbing classification license. That would make sense to me. I can't apply for something that I don't have experience in. But that is completely up to you. When we receive applications, what we initially do is we review them. If there's something wrong with them or if it needs correcting, we do return them for correction. And it's not a denial. It's a return, so you can correct it, and we can go back and forth like that. You do have 90 days from the first date that I look at it and return it for correction to get me back your corrections for me to post you and to refer you to exams. If I can't do that, it's a possibility that your application will void. And as seen on the applications, once they are submitted with the fees, they are non-refundable. So you do want to make sure that you have your information, your I's dotted, your T's crossed, sent in. Those my experience qualify me for a Class B. Tanya, I don't think so. just based on off the information you gave us that you worked for 6 years as a plumber, I would not say that would qualify you for a B class. If you want to send us an email asking for additional information, we cannot pre-qualify you or anyone else, but maybe we can give you a little bit more information. You can send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov. Heidi, I have worked as a landscaper gardener since 2005, full-time for about 7 different employers. Do I need to go locate all these people and get them to fill out the scope of work descriptions for the certificate of work experience? So the board only requires 4 years minimum. So if you said you've done it since 2005, we can only accept work experience back 10 years from the date that we receive your application. So you wouldn't need to go back. Let's say we received your application today, you could not go back any further than November 4th of 2012. If that did have 3 different employers, you could go to the employer if that's what you wanted to do, or as I stated earlier, your certifier does not have to be the employer. It can be a fellow employee. It can be a business associate. There's a couple different titles that are listed on the certification and work experience form. To be a certifier, they have to have firsthand knowledge of your experience. And when we say firsthand knowledge, we don't mean, hey, he told me or she told me, this is what they did. That's not the firsthand knowledge. Firsthand knowledge is we saw it. We were on the job site. We worked side by side with you. I was a subcontractor for so-and-so who was there. So it doesn't have to be the employers. It can be somebody, again, who has firsthand knowledge of that experience. I'm applying for an additional license, a B2 on my current license, a C7. I'm a sole owner with no employee. Do I still need to provide fingerprints? Depending upon when you were licensed, you may have to. If you haven't fingerprinted, I believe since 2004, then you will have to. If it's been more recent than that, chances are you did do it with us, and they would carry over. Clara says, sorry is corporation. I don't know what that means. Brian, I'm still a little unclear on the exam waiver. I have a 4-year BS degree and 16 years of doing a mixture of owner builder and working as a journeyman for a few contractors. I don't mind taking a test. Would this help speed the process or help guarantee I obtain a license? Dependent upon what your degree is, you could receive some education credit. So if you're going to send in an application, we would have to have the official transcripts from your school. As far as 16 years of doing a mixture of owner builder and working as a journeyman, it's also dependent upon the classification that you're applying for. You would not receive a waiver just because you have a degree and you have journey level experience. Again, some of the criteria for an examination waiver would be that you've already tested with CSLB for the same classification you're applying for, and it would have to be within the last 5 years. Or you could be listed on a license as an officer, a general partner, a member or manager for a minimum of 5 of the last 7 years in good standing. So not a lot of people meet that criteria. And it sounds like you would need to submit your degree with some experience so that we could take a look at it. Again, the waiver isn't because you have a degree. A degree can definitely get you some education credit, but it will not get you a waiver. Heidi, clarification. May I go back as far as 2005 and 2007 to certify all my experience? We won't count it. Unfortunately, we can only go back 10 years by state law. Am I restricted to just the most recent 2 or 3 employees? employers. You're restricted to the last 10 years from the date of the receipt of your application. We can't look at the 2005, 2007 because that is out of the 10-year experience gap. So your most recent within the last 10 years is what we want to look at. We have a corporation license, a C33. Can we have epoxy coating with the same trade C33? Claire, why don't you go ahead and send us an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov so we can talk about that, and you can give us your license number so we can look at that. Okay. Charles, I have been taking care of rentals for my family for over 20 years on nights, weekends, and some vacation days, doing repair work, construction projects, and managing subs. However, I am not an employee and typically don't get compensated. Can I count this time? Unfortunately, if it was on a voluntary basis, um, I'm going to say no. In addition, you cannot supervise, manage, oversee subcontractors. They are licensed contractors and do not require supervision. So applicants do not get credit when they state that they are supervising, overlooking, or managing subcontractors. Again, they are licensed, they don't require supervision, and you will not receive credit for that. Voluntary basis, doing simple things for your family is not going to be journey level. And this would be considered part-time since it's some nights, weekends, vacation days, doing repair work. It's not concrete. Depending upon the classification that you would apply for, it might be able to get by on some different classifications. It definitely would not work for the B class. We would have to have full-time journeyman level with compensation to count. Again, it's a little bit more in depth than some of the other classifications. So it would need a little bit more information. Dan, I worked for a flooring company for 8 years full time, but for the last 2 years, I worked as a machinist. My certifier also does not work for the company currently. Besides filling out the application form, what proof do I need to gather to prove my work experience? W-2s, pay stubs. So if you're applying for the C15 flooring, based on what you're stating in this question, again, it doesn't have to be your employer who certifies your work experience. They don't have to currently work for the employer. It has to be somebody who has firsthand knowledge of your experience. They've witnessed that you can do these trades. We will not ask for W-2s or pay stubs. We cannot by law at our level. Let's say, as was seen in the slides, there is a 3% that gets pulled for investigation. Now, if you were pulled by enforcement for investigation on that random 3%, they could ask you for those to prove that you were working for this flooring company. But at the level of a processing technician, we cannot. So my best advice would be that if you work for a flooring company, have somebody with a firsthand knowledge, fill out your form, you have your trades listed, and you can go from there. If you did it for 8 years and it was within the last 10 years, or at least 4 of those years were in the last 10 years, you could be fine to go through with your application. Cindy, if I were a handyman now going into window, doors, and screen installation, does my experience as a handyman provide me with credit? So being a handyman doesn't give you anything more than anything else that you've done. Um, going around your home, fixing baseboards, replacing a garage door, or a window, or fixing some plumbing fixtures. You don't get any credit for being a handyman. Um, you don't state that you have a city license or a county license, which also wouldn't give you credit. But I'm not quite sure what kind of credit you're looking for. Based on what you say, well, Windows is a C17. That would require testing, but you mentioned doors and screen installations. Um, so I'm not certain what classification you're looking at. Um, um, you would need probably to provide a little bit more information on what you were looking at and how you developed your experience that you're going to claim for the trade that you're going to apply for. Michael, I have a current license that will that number be assigned to my new classification if approved? If you're adding a classification to your existing license, your license number does not change. Again, you would have to be adding it to your existing license, and that number does not change. If you apply for a brand new license, there are chances that you can either take over your old license number or you can be reassigned a new number. But again, if it's applying for a new classification to your current license, then same number applies. I have a C7 locksmith PPO alarm license. I would like a D16 and D28. How do I do it? So a C7 is low voltage. I'm not sure if you're saying you have locksmith also besides the C7, but if you wanted to add the D16 and the D28, you would have to do an add class application, one at a time. You can only apply for one classification at a time. You still have to show 4 years full-time experience, journey level with a certifier per classification. Charles, I recently had my home built by a contractor and the permit was pulled by him. I did some of the work on the project to keep costs down. It included grading, fences, subfloor, underlayment, flooring, constructing out buildings. How can I count? Can I count that as owner builder? So owner builder, you would pull your permit. Um, you could still have a contractor on the premises. However, you won't receive credit for what the contractor actually did. So if he pulled the permit and it states that he did those things, the grading, fencing, flooring, and constructing out buildings, you could not receive credit for that. Yeah, as the owner builder, you would pull the permit and then you could hire other people to do it. But if he pulled the permit and it shows this was the scope of work, because he pulled the permit, it shows from the city or the county where he pulled the permit that he actually did that work. Um, they don't itemize the permits to say that Joe did this, Charles did that, and Tom did this. It's under his name and it states um, the reason for getting this or for getting the permit. So it's going to show that he did it. So if any of those trades were listed, you would not get credit for that. Arturo, my corporation is Westworld Security Services, Inc. If this helps with my question. I don't remember what your question was, Arturo. A second, let me see if I can pull that up. Okay, so you just have the C7 classification. So yes, if you want to add the D16 and there was another D, again, 4 years full-time experience, journey level per classification, one at a time, using the additional classification application, which is located on our website. Dan, just to clarify, he was not licensed. He was a supervisor. I gained enough experience to run my own crew. Dan, I don't remember what your, unfortunately, there's a lot of messages in there. So if you want to send an email, Dan, to licensing@cslb.ca.gov and give us that information again, we can look into that. Juan, my RMO will be disassociating from my company after 2 months of being licensed. If I start the process to take the test and get licensed myself, can I use the same company name? I do have my experience 4+ years. So Juan, if you already have a license established, but after 2 months of being licensed, so I'm thinking you haven't been licensed very long. If I start the process, your company name doesn't change on your license. Your experience, though, if you weren't licensed for the 4 years prior to the time that you're going to claim, you can't use that name with your license number, because we will look it up. We will see that, if I'm correct, that it's only been licensed for the last 2 months. You can't state that you worked there for 4 years. Full-time journey level in order to take that over. If you have experience elsewhere, for that same classification that your RMO holds, who is disassociating from your company, then you would be replacing the qualifier. You would use that application and you would submit your experience within the last 10 years from wherever you did receive it. Brian, please disregard my previous question. You answered my questions with someone else's questions. Thank you. Cindy, I have a few messages in there. Okay. Charles, I have been running a handyman business for the last 2 years, 1 year as a sole proprietor, and now the last year as an LLC. 2 questions. 1, can this experience count towards the qualification? 2, I want my LLC to eventually be able to do large projects, so would I apply as an LLC rather than under my name? It's completely up to you what entity that you want to apply for. I can tell you that as an LLC, if you apply for that before licensing, your issuance requirements are more than it would be if you were a sole proprietorship. You have to have an additional bond. You have to have liability in addition to workers' comp. So there is extra insurance requirements required of LLCs that have to be submitted for licensure and kept up with over the years. It's a possibility that your experience could count towards the towards the classification, but again, if you're applying for a B2, which is our handyman classification, which is pretty new, we have to see that you have that experience. Again, that is 3 unrelated trades. That does not include any sort of framing, rough, structural, or regular. It doesn't include installation or repair of HVAC, plumbing, or electrical. If you're applying for our handyman B2. The others you would have to have, if you were applying for, let's say, a B, handyman would probably not um, um, get you the qualification that you need for the B classification. But again, it is based on the class that you're going to be applying for. Because the B, if you're stating that you're self-employed, we would need to see project list again, finalize permits and inspection reports. David, can a B2 contractor repair fences or install replacement windows? So they can, but again, a B2 has to have 3 unrelated trades. So repairing fences and replacing windows. However, there needs to be another trade. You cannot just take on 2 of the unrelated 3 trades. That was David Gutierrez. David McLean is working as a construction manager for a construction company, count towards getting experience for a general B license. So if you're with you as a construction manager, if you are considered journeyman level, if you're considered a foreman, which could possibly be equivalent to a manager, it very well could be. Um, it's dependent upon who you worked for how long did you work for them, and how long were you in that position. Again, 4 years full-time experience within the last 10 years to apply for the B classification. Tariq, if I'm applying for a B license and I worked for a person when he had an S corp, lumped sum not under his payroll prior to him becoming a general contractor B licensed, do those years count? What evidence can I provide to prove that? Um, so did he 1099 you? If he 1099 you, that we still consider that employment. You could list him as your employer with his license number, with a certifier, again, who has firsthand knowledge of your experience. Um, so that's a possibility. Again, we can't ask you for W-2s or payroll recs. But based on what you're saying, you could have been 1099, which would still um, consider you an employee under him. If it was under the table and you did not receive a 1099 as a license B um, applicant, you would most likely need to show us the additional information that we ask for, which would be project list, permits, finalized permits, and inspection reports. It doesn't matter if he was a sole ownership or an S corp, a corporation. We don't look at that. Dan, I would also be applying for the flooring license. So the C15, Dan, 4 years full-time experience with somebody who has the firsthand experience being your certifier. You don't have to have permits to do the C15, but we do want to see your specific trades listed on your certification of work experience by your certifier, showing us or telling us, that you have this experience. Again, all of it would be reviewed. These are never just final answers. And upon review, your processing technician would make the decision whether or not we're going to pass you through to testing or ask for additional information. Renee, if I submit my application and my work experience does not meet minimum time requirement, then am I able to dig further and resubmit more experience? You are, but again, within the last 10 years, we can't go any further than that, and that is state law. If you were to submit, let's say, 2018 November to November right now, that's 4 years, and we say, okay, wait a minute, this doesn't add up or doesn't look good. You can only go back to 2012. Again, 10 years from the date of the receipt of your application is as much information as we can consider for your work experience. Renee, also, I have my own handyman business and want to progress to bigger projects. What is my best course of action to obtain my Class B license? Honestly, if you haven't worked for a License B contractor, I think that would be the best route to go. To have that tutelage and to work under someone to gain that journey level knowledge. I honestly believe that's anybody's best course of action would be to work for the classification that you want to um, specialize in, that you want to go further with in your life, especially if you don't have education to offset some of that experience, that 4 years full-time journey level experience. I would recommend trying to work for someone who holds the classification that you want to further your career in down the line. Renee, again, after obtaining a license to renew, do we need to retest, or is it just a fee to renew, keep the license current? So we don't offer, or we don't do continuing education for our licensees. You would have to renew your license every 2 years if you have been active, every 4 years if you have been inactive. Um, if you let it expire, you do have 5 years from that expiration date to re-up it or renew it before you have to reapply and retest at that time. But again, that's if you've let your license lapse over 5 years, then you'd have to reapply and you would be required to retest. Um, Tariq, if I have a BS in electrical engineering and a master in systems engineering and project management and 2 years of trade experiences, framing, painting, electrical, and supervising, working under a general contractor B, is that enough to qualify? It could be, but again, we would have to see your official transcripts with your experience in your application. Um, they gave you a generalization of what you possibly could earn from your degree in the slideshow prior to me coming on. So you should have a general idea of what you could be granted. Um, but I can't say for sure what you would be granted until we saw your application. Cindy Pridgeon, apply for a D52 and a D58. So I think you were the doors and screens. Um, one classification at a time. 4 years full-time journey level experience per classification. Again, doesn't have to be the employer, but would have to be somebody, your certifier would have to be somebody who has firsthand knowledge of your experience. Arturo, Dana, thank you. To clarify, I've been a C7, 2 years locksmith license, 4 years PPO license, 6 years alarm a month. Can I use this as my experience? So those other licenses aren't with CSLB. So I believe, not sure where locksmith and alarms go if it's BSIS. Um, you could possibly use it. Again, we'd have to see um, if you have a 2 years locksmith, you know, what did you do to gain that experience in order to get the license with that state agency? That's something that we would need to look at. Did they require, what experience did they require? Did you have to work for someone? Did you have to test? Same thing with the alarm. Um, you're more than welcome to use it. However, it might not be enough. I can't give you a concrete answer on that. Um, if you want to send me an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov, we can discuss it a little bit more in detail. Tariq, if I have over 6 years of experience under big engineering company, mixed of journeyman and supervision of 3 trades, low voltage, high voltage, and solar system development, can this qualify me for a B license? No, it cannot. The main component of the B general building classification is framing, rough framing or structural framing, with 2 unrelated trades. So you do have to have a structural framing in there somewhere. As an engineering company, I don't know if they just have an A if they're licensed or if they have other classifications, because there are some classifications where they can use the engineering wording. So if you want to send me a little bit more information, again, at the email licensing@cslb.ca.gov. I can look into it for you. It's dependent on a couple different things. But if you do not have framing experience, that would not qualify you for a B license. Could you clarify what trade duties a B2 license applicant must perform to qualify? Again, as per the slides, in the in the workshop prior to me coming on to answer the questions. A B2 classification requires 3 unrelated trades. There is no framing whatsoever, no install or repair of HVAC, electrical, or plumbing. So, as an example, you could do painting, you could do drywall, and you could do landscaping, let's say. Those would be 3 unrelated trades that could qualify you for the B2 classification. In addition, there are some things that Bs can't perform, like you can't do C57, which is well drilling, and you can't do the C16 fire. So those are also prohibited from the B2 classification. Arturo, I do this already, wiring and install equipment, D28, card activated equipment and other access control device and any low voltage electronic and contractor installs. Okay. So if you do that already, and you have somebody who can clarify this on your certification of work experience form, I would say to go ahead and apply for that D28 classification. So you're a little bit of a different scenario since you already hold a license with CSLB, which is the C7. If you're going to use the additional classification application, if you are approved and the work experience is sufficient for the classification you've applied for, and it's, let's say it's the D28, it can be added to your license almost right away because you don't have to take a test. There's no trade test for the D class subcategory classifications, and you've already taken the law exam when you took the C7. So there would be no additional testing for you, Arturo. Just as long as you met the criteria with the trades, then we can go ahead and add that on upon review and acceptance of your application. So I don't see any more questions. So let's give us a few more minutes here to see if anybody has any other questions they'd like to be answered in this workshop. I would encourage everyone just to if you wanted additional information or if I didn't answer your question to your satisfaction, you could email us or, I would encourage you to go back and rewatch the workshop. Um, it will be available on YouTube, and all our past ones are there also under our channel. They are a wealth of information. Um, and you just can't go wrong with that. But you are welcome to send an email to us at licensing@cslb.ca.gov at any time. And if we can answer that question, depending upon the what's asked and what we're allowed to tell you. Again, we cannot pre-qualify you. We can't say, yes, you're going to receive this much on your degree without seeing it. I can't pre-look at your certificate of work experience before you send it in. Those are pre-qualifications. You do have to send it in, pay for your application like every applicant, and then we can go from there. David, after the application fee is cashed, how soon will we hear from CSLB? So right now, I'm going to say that most of our application units are in a backlog. So I'm going to say probably anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. We do have people working all the time. We are here Monday through Friday, so they are working their schedules, Monday through Friday. We just have a high volume of applications, and Right now, unfortunately, we do have probably about a 4 to 6 week backlog. David, I built a permitted 500 square foot building from foundation to roof for my parents. Their house is on a trust. I'm technically an owner. Should I file this as owner builder or a separate experience towards a general B? Um, so if you file for owner builder, okay, there's a little bit of a different rule for owner builder. It's not based on years in that journey level profession, in that classification performing. Um, we have a enforcement classification deputy. We do send these to him for review because he has a little bit of a different calculation, but it's not going to be based on time. Most of the time, it's going to be based on the square footage and how long it took you to do that. Um, and of course, if you submitted that as an owner builder, um, you would have to send in your finalized permits and your inspection reports for that. So it's completely up to you if you want to submit that or not. Again, it's not going to be based on time when you do owner builder. Um, so um, if you only did it part time, it's your experience. If it's granted, will be back in part time. Because 500 square feet is not very big. So if it took you 2 years to build it, obviously you're not going to get 2 years experience for that. So it is up to you how you want to send that in. Renee, with the B2, can I do work such as switching a light fixture only or fixing a faucet? So 3 unrelated trades for the B2. It is our handyman classification. You cannot just take on switching a light fixture or just fixing a faucet. It would have to be 3 unrelated trades. Same as the B, where you would have to have structural framing with 2 unrelated trades in order to take on a job. Renee, I'm confused on the part that says B2 can't take on a contract with less than 3 trades. So in order to take on 1 trade, Renee, let's say such as switching a light fixture, simple, right? If you're not messing with the electrical component of it, whether it be high voltage or low voltage, um, a C7 could do that. A C10 could change the fixture. As a B2, though, you can't just do that because you're not a C7 or a C10, you're a B2. B2 is 3 unrelated trades. If you want more clarification, shoot me an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov. Charles, thank you for answering my questions. Charles, if you need more information, you can always shoot us an email also. Again, we can't give you particulars or we can't guarantee, but we can do our best to get you an answer so you can move forward with what you want to do. I have full documentation. Their name is on the permit as contractor for David. That's fine. If I remember correctly, I think it was they pulled the permit, but you're the owner builder. The thing is, when we look at it, again, we can't differentiate from what he did to what you did. I mean, it's going to be tricky for you to get credit for some of the work on there, depending upon the classification that you want to apply for. That was David McLean. So David Gutierrez, can a B2 contractor convert a garage to an ADU? That with 3 or more trades. So not if it's structural, not if you have to change the cosmetic structural component of the garage. You can't do anything that has to do with reframing. So if you had to retrofit a window, a door by changing the structure, load bearing, you would not be able to do that. Again, that would be a B. That would have to be a B. So it looks like I've scrolled down to the bottom of the questions again. Let's give you a few more minutes to see if anybody else wants to ask a question. Again, if you don't want to ask a question here, you can always send us an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov. So maybe we want to do a few more minutes, but let's do maybe a couple more seconds or so. For the person who asked about the home improvement salesperson application, it is a $200 licensing fee to get that going. And then, or like I said, every 2 years, you'd have to renew it. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so that's all the time we have today for our workshop. Thank you for all your questions. If you have any other questions about your application, we encourage you to drop an email to our licensing division. Here is that email address. It's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. Again, that's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. If at some point you need to reschedule your exam, you can get that process started by dropping an email to exams with an S at the end at cslb.ca.gov. We've also put together a list of available resources for women considering a career in construction. If you haven't already, be sure to download the presentation to get them. You can download the presentation on a green banner on the top of our homepage, which is www.cslb.ca.gov. If you're watching the archive video of this workshop on our YouTube page, you'll find a link to the presentation down below. We welcome your comments or topics for future webcasts. Just drop us an email at social@cslb.ca.gov. Special thanks to our licensing division and public affairs office for their help on this workshop. The Get Licensed to Build workshop is a copyrighted production of the California Contractors State License Board. Thank you for watching.